Couple of calls on hold, but let's get right to our new Monday guest, Max Chadwick, joining us to talk some serious ball. Max, appreciate it. Let's start with one of the issues of this day, and that was the game in the Swamp. You had a chance to look at it, break it down. What happened to the Gators?
Yeah, Paul, thanks for having me on again. And really, it just looked completely disheveled defensively. And this is not a new thing, right? Last year, we saw this all the time with the Florida Gators. They just blew coverages left and right. One guy messes up. And if you mess up in your secondary, that's backbreaking, right? Because that could lead up to huge touchdowns that we saw in this Miami game. And another thing, too, Graham Mertz, who last year put the ball in harm's way at one of the lowest rates in the country, he had 3 turnover-worthy plays in that game against Miami. He had 6 all of last year, right? So there's a combination of the Florida offense not being as good as they were last year and the Florida defense being basically as good as they were last year, which frankly is not good at all.
And on the Mertz, what can you pinpoint? Was it breakdowns? Was it protection? Was it lack of skilled players, or was he making faulty decisions?
I think it's a combination of a couple of things. I think one thing is Miami's defensive line is one of the best in America, and they were getting pressure on Mertz all night. I really think that Miami D line is honestly the best part of their team. That's saying a lot considering how good Cam Ward was in that game. So I think there's a little bit of that. And the Miami secondary really came to play as well. And then, yeah, like you said, Mertz just also made some bad decisions with the football as well, which is really something he hasn't really done at least last year at Florida. So I think the Miami D line really started it all, and then it just kind of snowballed from there and led to a pretty bad day for Florida.
Max, we haven't talked much about Georgia because it was a dominating performance, even though the first half was pretty weird to watch. Let me pause on the first half. What was going on there? Was that Clemson figuring things out, or was Georgia just once again starting slow?
I think Georgia started slow a little bit. I think they were really the one thing I noticed from their offense, at least in that first half, was Carson Beck was not pushing the ball downfield. In the first half, his average depth of target in terms of how far he was throwing the ball downfield was 4 yards. Now that jumped all the way up to 9 yards in the second half. What I think he was doing was biding their time a little bit and saying, hey, let's wait until they get gassed out because the Clemson offense isn't doing anything. They're punting every single time. And when your defense is on the field that much, they're going to get tired. And then Georgia took advantage of that, I think, in the second half. So I think it was more of Georgia just biding their time, waiting until they say, okay, now they got their hands on their knees right now. They're gassed out. That's when Georgia took advantage of the second half. So I don't even think it was Georgia playing bad in the first half. I think it was just a lot of strategy of saying, hey, we know we can open this up in the second half.
A couple of key players missing, including ETN. You add ETN. Obviously, they could have used him in the Swamp, but you add him not so much next week, but in 2 weeks from now at Kentucky, later at Alabama. How big a difference is this offense?
It's pretty big, but I want to shout out Nate Frazier, the true freshman running back in that game against Clemson. He was awesome. He was averaging like over 7 yards per carry in that game. And I think the Clemson run defense is actually one of the strengths of the team. So it's pretty scary when a guy who's not normally your number one running back is doing that well in his first ever collegiate game against a really good run defense. And now you're adding in a superstar running back in Trevor Etienne as well. That Georgia offense, which already has the best quarterback in the country in Carson Beck, in my opinion, all of a sudden you add a really good running back in Trevor Etienne coming off suspension. It's going to be really hard to stop them, honestly.
I want to ask you about 2 other programs from week 1. First, Texas A&M. We were led to believe they were the favorite in this game, that they had a shot at the playoffs. What's your exit of that debacle?
Yeah, debacle was a good way to put it. I actually picked Notre Dame to win that game. I thought the Notre Dame defense, and really it showed in that game, is elite. And I think Connor Wigman, who obviously a lot of people think is a really dark horse, Heisman contender, dark horse for a top pick in the NFL draft, he had his worst game of his career. I think he had like 28 passing grade in that game against Notre Dame. But I think it's more just how elite Notre Dame's defense is. And I think Notre Dame as a team is actually a lot better than some people give them credit for. So, yeah, it was a defensive slugfest. And like I said, I think Notre Dame has a top 3 to 5 defense in college football this year.
We've spent most of today not talking about Florida or those games, but LSU. Game last night, everyone knows what could have happened. It didn't. Do you still have any level of confidence about LSU, or are you shaking your head like Tiger fans?
There's a little bit of shaking your head. I think the Garrett Nussmeier, I actually, Brian Kelly said after the game, Bill and Ross outplayed our quarterback. I think it's being a little unfair to Garrett Nussmeier. I think he actually looked pretty good when he was out there. So Garrett Nussmeier, I'm a little bit excited about if I'm an LSU fan. I want to see some of the other receivers like CJ Daniels get involved more than just Kyron Lacey in that game. And then the defense kind of broke apart in that second half, especially at the end of the game, letting up the game-winning touchdown drive. But I think there's still some things to like with LSU. I also think USC is a pretty good team. I think they really fixed that defense this offseason, hiring D'Anton Lynn and bringing in so many guys from the portal. That offense is still going to be really good. Miller Moss was fantastic yesterday against LSU. There's still a lot to like with LSU, but yeah, it is a rough start to the season, I will say.
Finally, and I don't want to go down every game. I mean, congratulations to Vanderbilt. We didn't expect that. But of the mainline teams, 50, 60-point wins, was there anything, if you had to pick one of those schools that you said, man, thought they'd be good, they look a lot better than I thought, who would it be?
I will say Alabama looked really good against Western Kentucky. I think one thing I really love seeing was, okay, they lost Isaiah Bond, their speedy receiver to Texas. Who will be that new deep threat? This 17-year-old Paul, Ryan Williams, true freshman, he is that deep threat. The whole thing in his recruiting profile was this guy is speed, speed, speed. He had 2 catches for 139 yards and 2 touchdowns. This kid is the new deep threat for Jalen Moreau and Kalen DeBoer. And like I said, he should be a high school senior right now. He actually reclassified up from the 2025 class to 2024. He's only 17 years old right now, and he already looks like the new deep threat for Alabama. So that was a really exciting part of that game, and I'm excited to see what he can do the rest of his freshman season.
And we're excited to talk to you next week after Texas heads up to Michigan, a couple of other important games to wrap up. Max.